Hello, this is Roman Gabriel, and you are listening to The Grilling Truth.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the NFL Grueling Truth Legend Show, brought to you by Gridiron Mo, a new interactive football app where you get to call what the offense or defense should do in a live NFL game and see what all other fans have called also. Check out Gridiron Mo at www.gridironmo.com. As always, for the Legend Show, I'm your host, Mike Goodpaster. And today we have another Pittsburgh Steeler and another Pittsburgh Steeler quarterback. Last week we had former Steeler quarterback Terry Hanratty on. This week, we have Mark Malone. How you doing, Mark?
Mike, I'm doing terrific. How are you, sir?
All right. I see. I'm a Bengals fan, just so you know ahead of time, so I always hated the Steelers. But for some reason, I've had like 50 Steelers on in the last year.
Well, Mike, we all have our cross to bear. I'm sorry that you're a Bengals fan.
I know. Well, see, I'm the one Bengal fan that realizes I only hate the I hate the Steelers because they kick our ass all the time.
Well, you know, it's so it's so funny because I'm so far removed from my playing days itself. People always ask me that. And I haven't gotten a check from any team in the National Football League, and God knows when. So I spent a lot of time, obviously, doing a nationally syndicated radio show, and I called some NFL games on national radio for Westwood One. And anymore, I just root for good football games. I for some reason haven't carried that whole stigma of, I hate the Browns, I hate the Oilers, I hate the Bengals kind of a thing. I, for some reason, kind of turned over a new leaf.
Yeah, I've found as I get older, it seems to matter less and less anyways.
Yeah, I would agree 100%.
But, I mean, so who'd you cheer for when you were a kid then? I know you grew up in San Diego.
Yeah, no, I grew up in San Diego, and, I tried to play football. My mom wouldn't let me play football until I got into high school, and I proceeded to get my fanny beat around the field, not knowing how to play the game at all. I was a baseball player and a track guy, and happened to kind of take to the game and the sport well enough to end up playing major college football, and then, of course, drafted by the Steelers in 1980. But I can remember seeing my first football game at the old Jack Murphy Stadium when San Diego Chargers were in town, and just was enthralled by the sport itself. And, obviously as a kid, you have these dreams that you'd like to go on to become a professional athlete, but never thought that would happen. But that was my first football game in San Diego.
All right, so take us back. You grew up in San Diego, went to high school there. I know when you get to your senior year, you were one of the most heavily recruited quarterbacks in the nation, at least from what I read. So you want to walk us through the recruiting process in the mid-'70s and how that went for you and how you ended up at Arizona State?
Yeah, Mike, I actually had my choice to go anywhere I wanted to go in the country as both a football player and a track guy. Tom Tellez was the track and field coach at UCLA and was heavily involved in the U.S. Olympic team. And I had led the nation in discus and was in the top, I think, 10 in the state of California in the shot put. I triple jumped. I did it all. I did everything but pole vault, run a mile. And they wanted me, like heck, to take a track scholarship and train for the Olympics. And at that point in time, Bruce Jenner was a guy that, obviously won the decathlon and got his face on a box of Wheaties and made a living at it. But people back then weren't really making a living at track and field. And I had the same opportunity in football. I was one of the parade all-22s, so they pick a position at every or a player, I should say, at every position around the country. And I was the quarterback. Had a chance to go any place I wanted to go. I was actually going to go to UCLA to play football there. I was in Dick Vermeil's office on a recruiting trip, and I was all fired up. They had just beaten Ohio State and Archie Griffin in the Rose Bowl, and a game that I happened to be at as a guest of Coach Vermeil and his family, and I was ready to go. The phone rang before he had taken me to the airport. We were in his office, and he spoke for about 5 minutes, and on the way back to the airport, he suggested, actually told me, he said, listen, I want to let you know what that phone call was about. It was Leonard Toast, the owner of the Philadelphia Eagles, and he wants me to coach in the National Football League. And he says, you're going to hear a lot of stuff, obviously, because this stuff's going to leak out. I want you to know I have no desire to coach in the NFL. We still want you to come here to UCLA. We can build this program to new heights. And I said, terrific. And 2 days later, he called me and said, I'm taking the job in Philadelphia.
I think that's the story of every college coach that gets that call, isn't it, and what they pay old players.
Yeah. So my second choice, and listen, I like Tom Donahue, Terry Donahue, who ended up taking over the program, and Terry and I have known each other for years. Dick had a kid by the name of Shira at quarterback, and they ran a lot of option stuff, which I'd run some in high school, and but he assured me, Dick had, that when we came, or if I came, we were going to run a more pro-style offense, which would help develop me for the next level of football. I wasn't so sure that Terry was that convinced in making that offensive move. So my second choice was Arizona State. They had signed an agreement to move from the then WAC conference into the Pac-10 at that point in time by my junior year. So it was going to be a major conference, and they had just knocked off Nebraska to become number 2 in the country. And so I ended up going to Arizona State. It was 6-hour drive from Tempe, Arizona to my home in San Diego. So I was away from home. I was on my own, but I could get home if I needed to be. And so that's how I ended up at Arizona State. And it was, listen, I would do it all over again. I'm not so sure that Frank Kush, who I hated with every fiber of my being when I was there, because he was such a hard son of a gun to play for.
Yeah, from what I hear, calling him a drill sergeant would probably be an understatement.
Yeah, no doubt about it. He was, and I don't know how many of your listeners will remember Woody Hayes, but he was the Woody Hayes of the Southwest, and he used to beat and scream and yell, and hell, we'd practice 2 and 3 times a day, full contact, full pads, and I mean, he was a tough son of a gun. Now, I hated him when I played. I'm not so sure that as a former All-American nose tackle at Michigan State that guy was going to prepare me necessarily to play in the NFL at the quarterback position, but there are a lot of things that I learned having played with him or for him for 4 years that, I use in my life today. So Frank and I, unfortunately, he's dealing with some dementia and Alzheimer's now, and his health is a little bit shaky, but I idolize the guy now. If I had to come back and do it again, I would probably go back to Arizona State. And it was difficult because he ended up getting fired my senior year. He got into an altercation with one of the punters on the sideline, and I think took a swipe at him. And, of course, at that point in time, there was a faction of people at the university who thought his time had come to an end anyway. So they made a power play and forced him out. And our senior year kind of got, kind of blown up, if you will. But anyways, played 4 years there and got drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers just a couple months after they'd won their 4th Super Bowl. And off to Pittsburgh I went.
Now, see, I remember you being mainly a drop-back quarterback in Pittsburgh. I did not know that in 1978 you were the leading rusher at Arizona State and ran for 705 yards.
Yeah, we had a combination offense where we ran some sprint stuff, some sprint draw, a little bit of option, some drop-back stuff. It was kind of all-encompassing. But I'd come out of Arizona State. I was about 6'5" and 230 pounds, and I ran a 4.4 240. And had the fastest 40 on the team, and hell, when I got to Pittsburgh and the Steelers, I had the fastest 40 on the team. So they tried to use my athleticism, and so we ran the ball around a little bit. But to run the ball in college and running it in the National Football League are two different things. You don't last very long in the NFL.
Yeah, I think Lou Holtz figured that out when he went to the Jets and tried to run the offense. So let's talk about your draft day in 1980. I mean, you had to be excited to be going to the 2-time or the 4-time world champions, but you also got to be thinking, well, how am I going to win a job here? Terry Bradshaw is already there.
Yeah, it was so different back then, Mike, than it is today. Today, because the draft prospects are slotted, there's not much patience with quarterbacks today. You draft a guy in the first round, you give a couple of years. If it doesn't work out, you move on. Back then, it was more about when you drafted a guy in the first round, more often than not, he was going to spend a couple of years as an apprentice, kind of learning how to play in the NFL, learning the system, and those kinds of things. And I thought to myself,
even the guys that were taken in the first round back then were treated like that a lot.
Oh, absolutely. And I thought to myself, well, here's the deal. I'm getting drafted by the 4-time Super Bowl champions. They've won 4 of those things in the last 6 years. I've got Terry Bradshaw, who's still in his prime. Hell, I'm going to learn how to play in the National Football League for the next 3 or 4 years. In the meantime, I'll pick up a couple of Super Bowl rings, and boy, this is a great deal. It didn't necessarily work out that way. As a starter myself, I think the furthest we got was the AFC Championship game in '84 when we lost to Dan Marino and the Dolphins down in Miami. But, I was excited. I can remember the day I walked into that locker room for rookie orientation, and you walk in there and you look around, and it's really kind of a who's who of Canton, Ohio. I mean, whether it was
half the locker room's in Canton.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you had Joe Green and Terry Bradshaw and Stallworth and Swan and Lambert and Ham, and I mean, just go right down the line. Blunt. You looked around and you go, my God, I know I was a first-round draft pick. I don't know that I could play with these guys. It was rather daunting to walk into that locker room, and it took a while to finally understand and come to the conclusion that, listen, I can play in the National Football League. But, it was pretty daunting walking into that locker room for the first time.
Well, and you get there, I mean, you're surrounded by legends in the front office, the head coach. I mean, what was it like to play for the Rooney family?
Well, the Rooney family are obviously, from my perspective, a very special group. They are, one of the, kind of charter members of the National Football League. And we were talking about whether or not, I root for anybody. And I don't necessarily root for the Steelers, but I really enjoy when they have success because I'm very fond of the Rooney family. The chief, Art Rooney, who is no longer with us, was just a special guy who was a sportsman. And, I'd be in there, it'd be the last one in the locker room back when I was playing for them and having watched film and done whatever else, and come out of the shower, there'd be nobody there, and Chief would be walking through, and he'd give you a cigar and pull up a stool next to your locker and get out a deck of cards and sit there and have a talk and play gin. And he was just a special, special family. They live on the north side of Pittsburgh. They've been a fabric of that community forever. They not only expect you to be obviously good football players because they want to win there, but they expect you to be involved in the community and be one of them. And I don't know that exists as much today as it did back then. So for that reason alone, any time that they have success, I feel very good because I'm very fond of that family. I think they do things the right way.
Yeah, and the thing that's amazing to me about him is the fact that I've probably interviewed 20 former players and coaches that were Pittsburgh Steelers anywhere from the mid-'60s to present day, and every one of them absolutely says nothing but great things about him, and they all love the guy.
Yeah, no, he was terrific. Dan, his son, who has taken over now, his son Artie is kind of running the show. But even Dan back in the day, I can remember I had an issue with my knee and blew up my knee in the year, I think my second year in the league, and it got misdiagnosed by the team doctor, which things were a little bit different back then than they are today. And I walked in there and I had a meeting with Dan at that point in time because the chief, Art, was really not involved in the day-to-day operations any longer. And I said, Dan, listen, I got an issue. I said, I've had a second opinion on this. And I said, they're telling me I've got some torn ligaments. You guys said it's probably just a little cartilage tear. And I said, one of two things have happened here. Either you guys or the doctors have either not been honest with me or they've screwed up this diagnosis. And either way, I said, I don't want to have them operate on this thing. I want to go down and see a specialist. Back then, that was almost unheard of. And he says, listen, do what you have to do. Don't worry about it. Make sure you get well. Went down there and took care of it. And they took care of all the payment for the doctor and everything else and all the rehab stuff. And, away we went. So, I mean, he was always a fair-minded person. That family, to a great extent, has always been fair-minded. They have a way of doing things that some people wouldn't call progressive today, but I just think they've always been fair and honest, and they treat you like a member of the family. And like I say, that's hard to find these days.
Well, that's why they continue to win.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've always said this. Hell, I played in the NFL for a decade, and as a broadcaster now, I've been covering it for over a quarter century, and you're exactly right. Organizations that find success, it starts from the top and works down, and we want to talk about the head coach, but it starts with ownership there, and everybody takes their cue from them, and I agree with you 100%. It's why they continue to be successful.
All right, so Terry Bradshaw ends up retiring at the end of the 83 season. You were coming off the knee injury. Looks like you're going to be the starting quarterback going into 1984, and then all of a sudden the Steelers bring David Woodley in. What were your thoughts there?
Well, obviously anytime they bring in somebody that, that you're going to compete with, especially being a first-round draft pick, you're not particularly happy about it. I was coming back off of this knee reconstruction, and I ended up playing the rest of my career without a posterior cruciate ligament, so I had a little slop in the joint, and it wasn't responding quite as well. And of course, Dan Marino was drafted by Don Shula and the Dolphins. David Woodley had led the Dolphins to a Super Bowl and lost, and they didn't have any use for him. So if you remember, Chuck Noll and Don Shula used to play together and had a very long relationship. They ended up making a deal and brought David Woodley in. And David started the season because my knee wasn't really quite ready to go yet. And he kind of went up and down and struggled a little bit. And at some point in the season, Chuck said, hey, listen, your knee has come along. He says, we're going to go ahead and start you. So I ended up starting the rest of the year and ended up winning some pretty big games. We went out to Candlestick and beat San Francisco the year they were 15-1. And, of course, they went on to win the Super Bowl that year, beating Miami. But we beat them out there. We went to Denver and beat John Elway in a playoff game. And everything was rolling along pretty good. We went down to Miami, and I think we were leading at halftime in the AFC Championship game. And in the second half, Dan Marino just lit us up. He threw for, over 400 yards, I think, in that game. And we ended up losing. And then in the following season, I ended up starting, and I believe, actually your Bengals. I ended up dislocating my great toe in the Cincinnati game. And back then they decided not to do surgery on it, so it kept me out about, a month or 6 weeks before I could actually play again. But before that had happened, I think, 5 weeks into the season or so, I was leading the NFL in touchdown passes and quarterback rating and all that other stuff. Things were going really well. And just a combination of that injury and then ultimately tore some ligaments in my thumb and my throwing hand and those kinds of things, it just seemed like I couldn't get over the hump. And to be honest with you, Mike, I think that, I look back at it sometimes and I look at that roster in '84 when we went to the championship game, and I think a lot of people in Pittsburgh and for the most part in that locker room thought, boy, we're really close. We're a player away or so of winning the Super Bowl. But if you go back and you look at, running backs, offensive linemen, things of those natures, even on the defensive side of the football, there weren't a lot of household names. And, I always ask people, I said, can you tell me who started on the offensive line of that football team or who was the defensive end on, that defense? A lot of people can't remember.
Well, the guy that always stood out to me that most people that aren't big football fans that grew up through that era was Louis Lips.
Yeah, Louis Lips came on, and Louis was one of the guys that really I thought excelled. In '84, I think it was, John Stallworth, who's a Hall of Famer, had the best. He had the best year of his career from a statistical standpoint. The year we went to the championship game. Louis Lips, I believe, was a rookie in 83, 84. And Louis started to come around, and he was a different kind of wide receiver, but he started to put up big numbers, and we were able to get him the ball a little bit. Of course, John ended up retiring, Stall. So, we had guys, terrific guys. Frankie Pollard at running back, but, nobody remembers a Frankie Pollard. We had Ouija Thompson from Florida State, a white wide receiver. He's 6'6" and 230 pounds. Not a lot of separation there. We had a walk-on at Alabama at tight end, and Preston Gothard, who I think was an undrafted free agent, who started at tight end for us. So we had a lot of guys who had a lot of grit and fought, but not a lot of superstars, I think, on either side of the ball. You mentioned Louis Lips, and that would have probably been the biggest weapon I think we had offensively, especially after Stallworth retired.
Yeah. It had to be great, especially a young quarterback. Even '84, you've been in 4 or 5 years, but because of the injury, he hadn't played that much. He had to be somebody that you could really depend on. I think he ended up being even your team MVP that year, wasn't he?
Yeah. No, Louis was great. He wasn't a big, tall guy. He was kind of, on the shorter side, but he had a great ability to, one, run routes, and two, stop and change directions quickly. And back then, defenses around the league were starting to develop and evolve a little bit. They certainly weren't to the extent that they are today, but he did a great job of releasing at the line of scrimmage, which is what I think a lot of guys, young guys in the National Football League, even today, have trouble with coming from college to the NFL, and that is getting off of the jam at the line of scrimmage. And so, when you'd see press man and no safety, we'd had automatic checks and audibles, and we'd get the ball to him one-on-one, and he did a terrific job. He was a tough kid. He returned some kicks and punts for us as well, and I still communicate a little bit with Louis. But he was kind of the go-to guy. But once you took him away, there wasn't a lot left on the offensive side of the football.
Well, get me in touch with him. I've been trying to find him, actually. He used to always destroy the Bengals, but it's the Bengals, so most people do. But you had a great coaching staff there, and I don't think people realize you had Chuck Noll, but you had Tony Dungy was the defensive coordinator, and Tom Moore was the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, we had. Well, when I got there, you had Dungy, who had played there before, as kind of a defensive backup quarterback type of a guy. Ended up coming onto the staff, and he ultimately became the defensive coordinator. But we had not only Tom Moore, who I stay in contact with. He's still on Bruce Arians' staff out here in Arizona. I can't believe he's still coaching. But you had Tom Moore. We had George Perlis, who was the defensive guy. We had Woody Woodenhofer, who was a terrific linebackers coach. We had a hell of a staff. And I can remember oftentimes, Chuck was such a cerebral guy and so intelligent. And, coaches are teachers. That's what they are in the National Football League. I think we get away from that. But Chuck would look at things and try to dissect things and come up with different ways of teaching techniques. And I can remember leaving the locker room in the evenings. Usually I'd be the last one out and walk through the hallways and out to the front door. And I'd walk by Chuck's office. They'd be having a staff meeting in there about what it was they were going to do in the game plan that week, or some sort of new technique that they were going to teach. And I mean, they would be screaming and yelling at each other and calling each other, curse names. And I mean, I'm talking about guys on the staff that were, directing those kinds of verbal barrages, if you will, at Chuck Noll. I was like, holy crap, I can't believe it. That they actually talked to that guy like that. But, it's so funny because I think in a lot of situations around the National Football League, you get a lot of yes guys. They're happy to have a job. Whatever a coach says, yes, sir, that's awesome. Yeah, we're going to do that. And back then, I don't know if it was the makeup of the staff or the time and place or what it was, but boy, they used to have some great arguments about how to get things done, and I think ultimately that made us a better football team.
Well, see, I think this, and this has always been my point, I think a great coach, I mean, you get a lot of high school coaches, especially college coaches, but you walk up, a player will ask them something, and they'll take offense to it, like the players, questioning what they know. The way I always took it, I coached football 20, 25 years, coached my son's high school team now, coached arena football for a while, but the way I always took it was this: if you come up and ask me why I'm doing something, and I can't explain to you why I'm doing it, I probably shouldn't be doing it. So I think guys like Chuck Noll surrounds himself with guys that know something. And then he gets them to code, or they discuss it, they figure out how they want to do it, and then they do it the way Coach Noll wanted it done.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think anytime that you have a staff and people like that are responsible, and I mean, listen, as a head coach, you got to delegate a lot of authority. The defensive linemen are over there working on their techniques. It's part of what they're doing defensively, but as a head coach, you're not over there. But I think having an open and a healthy discussion about what's right, what's wrong, and how to accomplish something, and the old saying, there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, is great. And then at some point in time, you have to come up with a consensus at the end of the day and then move on and go ahead and teach it that way. And they were terrific at doing that. They really were. And like I say, I really believe that to a great extent, allowing to have that kind of atmosphere on the staff really helped that football team become, one of the best football teams of all time.
All right, and then you went from that to San Diego. I remember going and watching the Bengals and the Chargers in '88. You were the starting quarterback, and I really felt sorry. There wasn't much out there around you in San Diego.
No, there really wasn't. It's so funny. Don Coryell, well, they had called and made a trade for me. Dan Fouts obviously was a fixture there for years, and Dan decided to retire, and apparently they couldn't come to an agreement with Don Coryell, so Don Coryell decided he was going to quit too. So basically the entire staff was out. Dan was out. The team wasn't what I would call in great shape. Very, to a certain extent, a little bit like the Steelers. When I got to Pittsburgh in 1980, they had come off their fourth Super Bowl in 6 years, and everybody just thought, they were unbeatable. But when you start looking at that roster back then in Pittsburgh, a lot of guys were old and they were hanging on. And it was one of the things that I think Chuck always struggled with is at some point in time, you've got to be able to make, a decision on these guys, not based on emotion or what kind of relationship you had with them or what they've done for you in the past, but how they were going to be able to perform for this point forward. So, whether it was an L.C. Greenwood or, for instance, a Franco Harris at some point in time wanted a big contract. He ended up finishing his career in Seattle. And when you look at San Diego, it was very similar. I mean, Fouts had left, and some of the great players that they had gone on. Leslie O'Neal was still there, but was coming off an ACL injury. He wasn't quite the same player. Offensively, they had lost a lot of weapons. Al Saunders ended up becoming the head coach there. And it was just kind of, to a great extent, a little bit dysfunctional. They were trying to find their place. They needed to rebuild the roster. and it wasn't the easiest place to play. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I mean, the only weapon you guys really had on offense, I think, was Gary Anderson, if I remember, wasn't it?
Yeah, Gary was there, a hybrid guy who was a terrific athlete, could catch the ball out of the backfield. He was kind of a slasher. He wasn't a guy that was going to run anybody over, but he was a terrific athlete. He was there for a couple of years with us before they ended up getting rid of him. But we had a real young Quinn Early who was there, one of the wide receivers, and a couple of guys that looked like they could certainly probably play in the NFL and maybe have some successful careers. But, I mean, they were essentially rookies. And it was just very difficult to line up every Sunday and feel like you had a really good chance to beat the team that you were facing.
Well, I think you guys had Darren Flutie, Doug's brother, too, didn't you?
Darren was there. Yeah, Darren was a wide receiver, kind of a possession guy. Worked out.
He went to the CFL.
Yeah, no. So Darren was there. Great guy. I love Darren. Darren was smart as a whip, and he would have probably been considered back then a poor man's type, Wes Welker type of a guy. Wasn't going to overpower anybody, but really smart, knew how to run routes, and got everything. If you got it anywhere within the zip code of him, he'd find a way to drag it in. He was a great little player.
All right, so you get done with football. You retired, still young when you retired. Have any regrets?
No, I mean, listen, you go into the National Football League, and I think every player today does this. You go in with one goal in mind, and that is to win a Vince Lombardi trophy. And like I say, in '84, we got to the championship game and came up short against the Dolphins. If I look back on my career, I wish it had gone a little bit differently or a little bit better, or if this would happen, I wouldn't have gotten that injury, whatever. But those, you can't change those things. If I had to do it all over again, I'd do it all over again, to be honest with you. I don't know that I have any regrets. I wished I would have won a Super Bowl. That didn't happen. As you can see in today's world, that you don't even have to win a Super Bowl. You played in a Super Bowl. Even in the industry that I've been in for the last 26 years, people in this business set you apart. Your stature becomes a little bit different because you played in the big game or won a big game. That didn't happen to me, so I went about my business. Hell, I was 30 years old, I think, 29 or 30 when I finished. And you think, hey, listen, I got the rest of my life to live. I better figure out what I'm going to do and move on.
So, what made you decide on broadcasting?
Well, it's funny. I was actually I was apprenticing for a friend of mine who owned a construction company who built a lot of custom homes and things of that nature. And I was actually in the process of trying to put together a company and start speccing homes back then. And I got a call from the NBC affiliate in Pittsburgh. I was still living in Pittsburgh. And they said, hey, listen, we'd like you to come and, talk to us about, being the analyst on a pre- and a post-game show that we do with the Pittsburgh Steelers. They had the contract locally. So I went and talked to them, and I gave it some thought. And I said, here's the deal. I'd be happy to do that, but I'd like to have kind of unfettered access to your general assignment news reporters, to your sports department. I'd like to learn about the business. I had no education in broadcasting whatsoever. So I said, I just want to do that. I'm not asking you to pay me or anything else. I just like to ride around with these reporters and hang out in your sports department. And personally, I thought I would give myself maybe a year and see, A, did I like it? B, is it something that I can, get my hands around and get better at, and kind of see where this is going, and then make a decision after that. And, one thing led to another. I think the first year I worked in broadcasting, Mike, I made $12,500. And
a little different in the NFL.
Yeah, a lot different.
Now, did you get anybody that was already broadcasting, went to school for it? Did you get anybody that maybe held some resentment because you got the job and didn't go to school for that?
Yeah, I think there's probably some of that went on, but I think I was able to erase a lot of those feelings because of just the way I went about it, and I didn't ask for anything. I just worked for everything I got. I would hang around with general assignment news reporters, and we'd go out, do a story on a house fire or, whatever. And then I would hang out after dinner. And remember, at that time, with my wife at the time, I just had twins. So I'm making $12,500. I got twins at home. I'm trying to juggle all this stuff. I'm in the sports department at nights trying to figure out how it is that they put together sportscasts. And then when they would go home at night at 11:30, I would go down in the newsroom, and they had one of those fixed cameras and a little teleprompter that they would do updates on, and I would I'd write a sportscast and I'd set it up, and I would practice on the teleprompter and do a fake sportscast, and I'd look at it, and I just did that 2, 3, 4 nights a week, and just tried to work at it, and then things started to happen for me. Somebody screwed up the vacation deal, and it was Christmas night, and they didn't have a guy on staff to do the sports that night. So the news director called me in and said, "Hey, come here." He says, "I'm not telling anybody about this because if somebody's watching and you screw this up, it might get me fired, but I want you to anchor the sportscast on Christmas Eve." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I did that. By the way, the sports director, or not sports director, the general manager, the news director of that station at the time, I keep in touch with him. He sent me a tape of that first sportscast I did, and I looked at it, and I thought, how in the hell could anybody hire a guy that was that bad that early in his career? But I got through that, and then all of a sudden, the Pirates went to back-to-back NLCSs. The Penguins and Mario Lemieux were winning Stanley Cups. The sports department was short-staffed, so they started sending me to Madison Square Garden to cover the Rangers and the Penguins. And then I went down to Atlanta to do the Braves and the Pirates in the NLCS, and started doing live hits and those kinds of things. And it just kind of started to snowball, and I started to get better at it, understand what was required of me. And I had a guy that I worked with in the sports department that said, "You ought to be doing national stuff." I said, "National? Are you crazy?" I said, "I can't hardly get through this." And he said, "No, I'm serious. You're getting pretty good at this." So I hired an agent, got me an interview and an audition at ESPN. They hired me as a bureau reporter. I worked a year or two as a bureau reporter, and they hired me full time and gave me my own show. And I worked a decade there, and I left there and went to Chicago to become the sports director and anchor in Chicago at the CBS affiliate. So it's worked out. It's been a great second career. It's kept me close to sports. I didn't go to a university or get educated on it, other than just kind of grassroots. Get down, get dirty. I'm not asking to get paid. I want to figure out how to learn how to do this. And I think to a great extent, it's probably made me a better broadcaster, because everything you learned is the real life thing. It's not something that's in a vacuum in a classroom someplace. So
yeah.
That's kind of how I got into broadcasting, and like I said, I think I've been doing it now for 26, 27 years, and it's been terrific.
All right, so you want to tell listeners where they can hear you today and anything else that may occupy your spare time right now?
Well, I try to play a little golf out here in Scottsdale when I get a chance. Not as much as I'd like to, but I've been doing a nationally syndicated sports talk radio show on NBC Sports Radio. It's called Under Center with Mark Malone. And I do it Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 Eastern Time. And if you don't have an affiliate in your marketplace that carries the show, you can also, go online or get the NBC Sports Radio app and listen to it online. So I do that Monday through Friday. I've been calling national football games for Westwood One on national radio for probably 7 or 8 years now. So that occupies a lot of my time during the football season. You do the radio show Monday through Friday and jump on a plane and do NFL games on the weekend. So, so far I figured at some point in time, Mike, somebody's going to pat me on the butt and say, "You're getting kind of old. Thanks for being here." So I figure I'll just continue to work and make as much money as I can. I enjoy what I'm doing, so it's all been good.
Well, you retired from football young. You're still young then, right?
Yeah, I'm still young, but you know how this business is. They'd much rather pay some 27-year-old kid about
that's every business anymore, Mark.
Yeah, exactly.
But the joke will be on everybody else when 20 years from now, everybody's out of a job because they got robots doing everything.
Exactly. Well, I hope that...
So at least Wolf got to work longer than all those guys did.
I'm hoping by then I'll be 6 foot under the ground. But, it's all good. I've enjoyed the heck out of it. And, one of the nice things about the broadcasting is that, I've been able to keep a lot of those relationships that I had when I was playing football, and you're talking about things that you enjoy and you love. And so for me, I left the game, but I really didn't leave the game, and at the same point in time, been able to make a living at it. So.
All right, and I talked about being a Bengal fan and always get Steelers. I just got confirmation that next week on the Legend Show, our guest will be Rocky Bleier, who was, of course, a Pittsburgh Steeler.
One of my favorites, by the way, yeah. I saw Rocky at the Super Bowl the other day. I said, "Buddy, what have you been up to?" He says, "Well, I'm still speaking." I said, "Have you changed anything about that presentation in the last 30 years?" He goes, "Hell no, I still say the same old thing. They keep buying it up." So tell Rocky he's one of the great guys. Obviously, his story is terrific, having been a Vietnam vet and and then gone on to the Steelers to win those Super Bowls.
Oh, yeah, I remember being 12 years old when I think it was Fighting Back came out and watching that movie, and he was one of my favorites from then on.
Yeah, you'll have a great time with Rocky. He's a terrific guy.
Well, Mark, I want to thank you for coming on the show today. Greatly appreciated.
Mike, it's my pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much for having me, and you have a good rest of your year, my man.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mark. All right, guys, that was former Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback Mark Malone. You can check all of our shows out on iHeartRadio, iTunes, Google Music, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, anywhere you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. Make sure you catch our sponsor, Gridiron Mo, at www.gridironmo.com. So for Mark Malone, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.